There are two previous videos in this module that are really dedicated to finding sources. And that is an element of research that's really important. I think it really depends on your topic for this particular paper, how difficult that process of finding sources might be. It's certainly something we want to practice. For some of you, it might be really straightforward for this essay. Maybe for essay 3, it'll be a little trickier. We can talk about some of the challenges of that later in the semester. But finding sources is certainly an important part of the research process. One of the things I'm going to suggest, though, is that probably, well, it's hard to kind of rank these things, but just as important, if not more so, is what do we do with our sources once we've found them? And this is a part where I see students often falling a little bit short. And what I mean by that is that students will, you know, they know they have to use three sources. So they find three sources and they think, well, okay, I've got these three sources. Let me go through, I'll find a quote from each source. I'll put that quote in my essay and I'm done. And what that leads to is evidence from sources that are not put in context, not introduced, not analyzed. And frankly, it can often lead to sort of misreading a source because students are just hunting for some kind of quote that either proves their idea or does something useful, and they don't stop to kind of think about, well, what is this source? Should I be using it in the way I'm using it? Is there information that my reader needs about this source in order to make sense of whatever it is, this quote, this detail, this statistical piece of evidence, whatever it is that you're including from your source. So there is a handout that's attached to this that I'm distributing to you guys. I'm not asking you to turn it in or anything like that. Instead, I'm suggesting that uh, these are questions that you need to think about with every source that you use. And if you do think through these questions, and in fact, if you make yourself write responses to some or all of these questions, even though you're not turning it in, you're going to generate a lot of material that can translate directly into your essay. So let me show you exactly what that looks like. Um, we'll return to the idea of writing about climbing on Devil's Tower. Okay, since again, that's a familiar article. And as I mentioned before, that there's a possibility maybe with this particular topic, maybe we'll use some sources that are a little different. So one of the first ones that comes up here is this thing called Mountain Project. That's about climbing in Devil's Tower. And one of the things I'm curious about is, I read that article by Chris Kallman. It suggests that like there's this climbing closure, but it's not really publicized. People don't really know what it's about. So I'm curious, like from a climber's perspective, is that what's going on? And this looks like a climber's website. It's giving me like a lot of detailed information that I don't necessarily know that much about. And one of the things I notice here is, okay, Devil's Tower climbing. The native name for Devil's Tower is Bear's Lodge. This is a special place for many people besides climbers, and it is important to respect the closure for the entire month of June! Exclamation point. Interesting. Um, Maybe that's a quote that I want to appear in my essay. So again, if I am playing the role of student who is like just eager to get this assignment done, then maybe what I do is I put this quote in my essay. I put it in quotes. I put Mountain Project in parentheses. I have some information. I'm writing beforehand. It's important not to climb in June. I have my quote, and then I just move on. This is what I refer to as a dropped quotation. In other words, we're writing, we just drop a quotation in, we don't introduce it, we don't explain it, we don't set it up, we just say, hey, I was supposed to use sources, here's my source, I'm moving on with my life. We want to avoid this. When we use quotes, and this could be a very interesting quote to use for a variety of reasons, we really want to think about how we can introduce those quotes and how we can help our reader make sense of them and how we can actually like write about them, analyze them, connect them to what we're thinking about. And so again, this worksheet I think is going to be helpful in that regard. So let's back up for a second. What is my source here? Well, my source is a web page about Devil's Tower climbing. And where is it from? Well, it's on this website called Mountain Project. So what is Mountain Project? Mountain Project calls itself the definitive climbing resource. Interesting. It looks like it's a really kind of very well developed website with a ton of details that covers like a lot of areas in the US. So if I was filling out this worksheet, I might write something like this source comes from Mountain Project, which is a website that offers climbing information. And if I was like particularly confused about what a particular, if I found something on the web and I didn't know the source, or if I had like a journal and I wanted to know more about it or something, I could always just double check. I could look for more information on the site itself. I could also do something like Mountain Project Wikipedia to see, again, if there's like a, not Dark Mountain Project, just Mountain Project, to see, is this website like what it says it is? And it looks like it is. Also, one of the things that this shows me is like it's pretty popular. Like this is old information, but it's used pretty frequently. Okay, so um, this source comes from Mountain Project, which is a website that offers climbing information. This source is uh, a web page describing Devil's Tower that reveals something interesting, I would say, about um, about how climbers talk about the closure on Devil's Tower. Um, like I think it's interesting that it's actually pretty vague. Um, this is a special place for many people, but it doesn't really say like Native American people or a particular tribe. And it mentions the closure, but there's not like a ton of detail. There's no link or anything like that. So I find that kind of interesting. Um, the primary type of evidence used in this source is, well, there's not really evidence. It's just kind of, we might say that it's really kind of a general statement without, links or data or backup, right? It's just what's actually to me so interesting about it is that it is so general and so vague. Okay, so the author, one of the people quoting the source, whatever. In this case, the editors of the web page, right, claim that climbers shouldn't climb in June. And one quote that reveals that claim is just going to be the quote I was going to use in my paper, right? This source is important to my essay because I'm curious about how climbers talk about Devil's Tower and if they respect the closure or not. And if I want to know something like this, how do climbers feel about this? I'm not going to go probably to like the library database or a peer-reviewed research study. Maybe if there's a research study on opinions about climbing in Native American spaces, that would be cool. But why wouldn't I just go to like the climbers website if I wanted to find that out? And then these are the questions I'm not going to go through now, but these are kind of help you think about sort of where you are in your process. Before I read this source, I'd never thought about, so what did you learn? And then what else do you need to know? And that can kind of help you figure out, do I need to do more research, etc. So kind of simple things. They might seem pretty simple. For some sources, these may be trickier, but nothing too crazy. Um, so now what? How do we go from our just dropped quotation to something a little bit more rigorous and substantive? Okay. So maybe I should start thinking about, well, why is this quote in my paper? Well, because again, I'm interested in what do climbers think about this closure. So I might draw a conclusion here, right? Um, Climbers seem to be aware of the closure on Devil's Tower, but the discussion of it is pretty vague. For example, the website uh, Mountain Project simply states that, and then I have my quote. I don't need this citation now because I introduced it. So already I kind of have a claim that I'm making, I'm introducing my quote, etc. I don't want to stop there though. In fact, looking at this quote makes me think, well, geez, I just kind of glanced at the page. Is there any more specific information anywhere else? Because this does seem pretty vague. So maybe I could say the mountain project simply states that the native name for Devil's Tower is Bears Lodge. This is a special place for many people besides climbers, and it is important to respect this closure for the entire month of June. Um, so one of my maybe I want to know, right, that um, the website does not specifically explain that Native Americans value the site or explain the rationale behind the closure, something like that, right? I just didn't see that in there. But let's look back. Maybe I'm missing something that might be interesting. Um, it doesn't really seem it, right? Description, getting there, etc. But if I scroll down, I look at all these comments, and now this is kind of interesting, right? Um, are people talking about the closure in the comments? And if they are, that would be really interesting. Um, and what kinds of issues are they discussing? What kinds of things are they not talking about? Um, and look, don't forget the voluntary climbing moratorium during June. Doesn't seem to be mentioned on this page, but out of respect for Native American tribes in this area, June should be considered off limits. Okay, interesting. So some climbers are more cognizant, are a little bit more educated on this. Um, does the discussion continue? Um, let's see. Here's a survey that could be interesting. Black Hills Climbers Coalition. Here's a longer comment about the management plan. So all of a sudden I'm realizing like, oh, there's a lot more going on, not from like the official page, but from all these commenters that could be really useful, and even a link to a forum where people are discussing it. So this is going to tell me all kinds of stuff about maybe the debate. Now, can I quote from Stag54 Taggart? Sure, of course I can. I just need to point out, when I do that, that you are, that I'm quoting some anonymous person, right? So maybe I find that this quote's really interesting in my paper too. However, some commenters on the site engage in a debate about the closure. According to anonymous uh, commenter, I'm not going to fill that in. I don't want to go back and look blank. Right now, I can do all kinds of really interesting things. So I'm not going to belabor this too much more, but the key point I want to make here is that when you find your sources, we don't want to just kind of pick out the first thing we notice, drop it in, and move on. In fact, looking really carefully at your sources and thinking about them should be the very thing that helps you start writing. Using the information, using quotes or details or examples or evidence, and really kind of thinking about putting them in context and then responding to them, making connections between sources. That's how you write. It's not just kind of sitting and trying to dream something up out of nothing. The whole reason to do research is to find information that you can then respond to in your writing. So I hope this example is helpful, and the worksheet here I hope is really can be really helpful to you. I'm very happy to answer questions about any of this in office hours, just over email. Again, this is nothing you need to turn in. I think some of you will find that this really clicked for you. Some of you may feel like maybe this doesn't quite fit with your topic, and that's fine. But the main takeaway is just thinking really carefully about how you use your sources. So it's not just finding sources, it's not just picking quotes, but thinking in a really critical and careful way about how do I use evidence from these sources.